Welcome to Inside Photo Organizing, from DIY to Pro, with Allison Friedman from Arrange Wander Focus of Chicago, Illinois. And I am Susan Wallach from Save a Memory of Northern Colorado. Together, we will provide photo organizing tips and tricks for everyone from the person who wants to do it yourself to other pros in our industry. We'll discuss current software and hardware news about photo and digital asset management. We will be answering your questions, and we hope that as you learn more, you can complete your own photo organizing project and feel more confident to finally know, hey, I can find that special photo that I've been looking for. Good morning, Allison.
Good morning, Susan. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I am good. It is Monday. We usually tape on Mondays. So, of course, had a nice, fun weekend with the family, and now have the door of the office closed with the big recording sign on it so that nobody comes in.
Well, that's
We're ready
the
to
hope,
go.
right?
Yeah,
With
that is
kids,
always
you
the
never
hope.
know.
I know. You never really know. It's not so much the kids at this point, but it's the dog who will scratch at the door. And at some point, if I do disappear for like 2 seconds, that's why. It's because he'll be whining at the door.
Well, he can't read the sign.
I know. I really should teach him to read. He's pretty smart, but reading is not his strong suit.
Yeah. Well, my baby's laying right over there. She's oblivious. She's 12 now, and it's all about the walk, the food, and the sleeping. That's about the
Yeah.
extent of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Pets are so funny though, because, and I'll just relate this sort of tangentially to photos since that's what this podcast is about, but not really. But I literally have more photos of my dog than anybody else. But they're so funny because my kids keep telling me, oh my gosh, he's such a stupid dog. I was like, oh, really? Because he literally gets everything that he wants all the time. If he wants a walk, he gets it. If he wants a treat, he gets it. If he wants to eat, he gets it. He's like, he's better than you. You guys don't. He does. So it's very funny. We have that conversation a lot. And I do actually I'm pretty sure I have more pictures of him than I do of either one of my children.
Well, that's easy because I don't have kids. So all of my animals, I have way more photos than I have of any other family member.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's, So with that non-segue, which literally has nothing to do with today's guest.
Well, it does, because
Okay.
yes,
Let's hear the connection.
She takes lots of photos, and she was a photographer.
Okay. We'll have to find out if she has a pet. So if she can wind in the pet thing at the beginning when she's introducing herself, I'll be really, really impressed. But I'm really excited to have this month's guest, somebody that we both know well. Very smart, very interesting woman who is a little bit of a different business than a lot of the people that we've talked to.
Very business savvy.
Very business savvy. In fact, I think both of us have probably gone to her for business advice. I know. Yes. I have. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, so we are excited to have Caroline Guntur of the Swedish organizer here. And I will say this is going to take us a little international because I don't even know where she's coming from today. She's kind of all over the place, so she'll have to let us know. And with that, welcome, Caroline. We're happy to have you here. And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I can bring in the pets right away if you want to, and I think that's a really good way to tie all this together. Yeah, I actually grew up in Sweden, for those of you who don't know, on well, it's not really like a working farm or anything. Like, we didn't have cows or pigs or anything like that, but it could have been, like it was a bigger place, and we had ton of animals. Like, I had 6 horses, we had some sheep, we had bunnies, dogs, cats, all sorts of animals. So I have plenty of photos of animals in my collection.
All right. Well, before you begin in Swedish, I want you to say welcome to Inside Photo Organizing.
Välkommen till Inside Photo Organizing med Susan och Allison. Vi hoppas att ni ska tycka om detta avsnittet. Det kommer att bli jättebra.
Okay, that was a little more than welcome. I got the Susan and Allison. What'd you say after that?
I just said I hope you're going to enjoy this episode. It's going to be a good one.
Aw, thank
Excellent.
you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, now we have an international podcast.
There you go. There you go.
Well, people are downloading it from over 43 countries right now.
Wow.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Do we have any Sweden? Do you know? I'm putting you on the
Yeah,
spot.
Will
Do you
be.
remember the?
I'm pretty sure we do, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. You'll have to
So
let
for
me
our
know.
Swedish listeners, that was for you right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to backtrack a little bit and give you a little part of my background. So, obviously, I grew up in Sweden. I came to the US in 1999 for college, and I went straight into the entertainment industry, basically. So, my schooling is all in media. It's in visual communications and TV and video production and music and talent management and that sort of thing. Um, but when I was done with that, I actually didn't really have a permit to work here in the US. So that took a while to set up. And by the time I got around to actually working, after having my daughter and all of that, I was like, I should probably get a real job. Like, what is a real job? Because all of this entertainment stuff, like a lot of it's freelancing, right? And a lot of it is a little less secure in terms of regular positions. And so I started my own company because I was like, well, what could I possibly do that I'm really good at that would be a successful company? And I picked residential organizing. So that's how the Swedish organizer was born. And obviously, I did closets and basements and things of that sort for quite a while. But then in 2015, I started realizing, with the amount of travel that I do and hopping around, I just cannot be location based. And so that's when I started pivoting to online courses and online coaching and taking all this stuff remotely. And that's kind of what I've been doing ever since. So it's been kind of a very interesting journey, of how this has evolved. And obviously, the photo organizing fit me like a glove, given my photography background and media background.
Where are you coming to us from today?
I'm in Chicago today for once, but I'm not here for
Okay.
long. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If
So
you follow her on the social, it's like, where in the world is Caroline?
where's Waldo? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't help myself.
Well, if
But
you
I
can, do it,
I love it, because
Yeah.
I get to, just like how you're saying this is an international podcast, like I love meeting clients from all over the world. I love traveling. I love the learning and the experiences that I get from all of that. It's just, I think it's the best thing ever.
Tell
So,
us a little bit about the photo aspect of your business now, since this is inside photo
yeah,
organizing.
yeah. Yeah, so I started a DPO Pro, which is my main photo organizing course in 2016. And that's basically that's like my main photo organizing offer at this point. And that's the one I've been running for the majority of the time. But I also coach a lot of photo organizers and I train a lot of business owners who want to go into that profession, a lot of them coming from virtual assistants, for example, and that type of background. So I'm mostly focused on training and teaching and coaching at this point. But I did offer photo organizing for quite a few years, especially remote photo organizing. And that was always fun. It was uh, a bit different back then because now, post pandemic, everybody's like, oh, yeah, I know what Zoom is. I know what, Team Viewer is. I know what this and that is. I understand how that works. I used to have to call people on the phone to explain to them how to install the remote software and walk them through it that way on their computer. And they're like, I don't know. This feels a little scary. Like, is this for real? I'm like, no, no. It used to be such a different pitch than it is now. And I feel like, um, you know, maybe the silver lining is that we kind of moved that conversation forward a little bit.
Yeah,
For sure.
that is actually interesting. I was thinking back to, just prior to 2020, and I did have a fair number of, this is my old life, and we did have a fair number of video calls, which is what we called them then. We called them video calls. We didn't call them
Hmm.
Zoom. I think Zoom now literally means anything, where you're sharing the screens,
It's kind of
and it
like
was
Kleenex.
actually, yeah, it was kind of a production to get it to work. It is much, much different now. Gives us a
Hmm.
much bigger reach. So tell me this, I'm curious because you're Swedish, so I have to ask. Um, are you influenced by the Swedish death cleaning, which you've probably known about forever, but in like my circles, I really only started hearing about it a couple years ago, maybe. So is that something that you ever worked with, or is that incorporated into your courses and things at all with your approach?
You would think so, but no, not really. Maybe
Okay.
maybe to a tiny extent because I am Swedish and that's kind of in me culturally. I grew up with it. But I am not so big on the decluttering aspect, maybe as some other organizers are. I really don't care how much stuff you have. I leave that up to you. I care about what you do with it and the fact that you can handle all of it. So if you have a little, great. If you have a lot, great. We can fix that. We can manage it in a different way. Um, I guess I did a little bit of death cleaning, when I first got started with the residential organizing, and that was kind of a part of it. But that's more of a lifestyle type of thing, where you take your time and uh, you sort of downsize over time. It's not really, in my head at least, fit for an organizing job that lasts a week or two. You know, it's more of a shift in your mindset than anything else.
So that's super interesting that you said you don't really care how much stuff people have, because we have had guests on before, and a lot of the focus and a lot of the clients that we get too are, help me cut this down.
Mhm.
So, from your perspective, why doesn't it matter how much stuff you have?
It matters if you can, like, I just want to know that you can handle it. So just for reference, like I've had clients with very small photo collections who didn't know what to do with them. And then I've had clients with giant million plus photo collections who knew exactly what to do with them. It's all about, have you developed organizing skills throughout your life? So do you know how to handle what you have? You have to kind of match up the available resources that you have with the task at hand, right? So same thing in residential organizing. I had clients with huge closets who were impeccably organized and just maybe needed a little bit of help, you know, putting things in order every now and then, and then just kind of checking up on it. And then I had clients with tiny closets who had just maybe 10 items who were completely disorganized and could never find anything. So yes, obviously, the less you have, the less variables you're dealing with and the less maintenance you're dealing with. But I really don't care if you want to have a lot of stuff in a big house and all of that. And that's totally fine with me as long as you know how to handle and maintain it and not feel overwhelmed by it. So I leave that up to whoever the client is to decide, how much they want to have. And if they want me to help them downsize, I'm happy to do that, but I don't make that like a requirement. I just don't want them to have a bunch of duplicates and unnecessary photos and things like that. That's kind of not necessary to store. But beyond that, yeah, I don't really make that a focal point of the conversation.
So, Caroline, I want to go back to I watched one of your training videos because I am a, a client of yours, and it had talked about this family photo where you had your husband's
Mhm.
parents and your parents, and in that you said that you were a photographer at that time. So, where
Mhm.
does that timeline,
Mm.
um, come into play with your business growth?
Yeah, that was right after I got to Chicago, basically, and right after
Oh, okay.
yeah, right before I started my organizing company, I thought maybe I would go back, into photography, and then I pivoted and said, no, I'm going to do organizing instead. But yeah, for
But you
a year
still
or
had
two.
that love for
Oh yeah,
photos and yeah.
always, always, yeah. And I was good at it. It's just that it was such a different industry, and it was just tough. It was long days. It was difficult to be on set and a lot of back and forth. And yeah, I wanted to be my own boss.
So you started with home organizing, and how did you get into the photo end of it?
I had actually heard of some other organizers at the time who were doing projects like that. And I thought, with my background, that seems to be a really good fit. So I kind of dipped my toes into that. And it was a really good fit, because I found that love for photography again that I had been kind of ignoring for a little bit. And then obviously with the whole digital photography explosion, on all the photos that people take and the devices, that just kind of grew and grew and grew. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah,
So what are
it's Sorry, go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Susan.
No, I was just going to say, so how did you develop this, flow specifically for the digital side of things? How did that concept of really, like pinpointing that was your direction? Like, how did you get, was that your passion? Because we all deal with so many different aspects of organizing photos. Many of us deal with the physical most of the time, but you seem to have landed on this concept of helping people wrangle their digital,
Yeah.
libraries. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I found that a lot of my clients were really, really stuck, especially back then because they didn't know how to consolidate. And they made so many mistakes in trying to consolidate that they just ended up creating duplicate after duplicate after duplicate. And I just kind of saw that that was a huge problem. And so I started talking to people and like, let me try and understand like what's happening here and like, why did you choose to do it that way? And what are you thinking here? And I've come to find out that a lot of people, first of all, they didn't know what program they should be using. And that was a big stumbling block. They didn't know how to consolidate, and that was another stumbling block. And it was just overwhelming for a lot of them. And so, in the combination of those three things, I sat down and I said, okay, so what they really need to understand is how do their digital universe look? Like, what does this actually look like? Where do things live? That's another thing, right? They had no idea, like, what is this cloud thing? And, or like, I don't know how many, phones or devices I have and that I should be pulling photos from regularly. And you have to remember too, we had so much SD cards and CDs and like all of that type of stuff was a thing as well. People were just sort of in that transition. Now it's mostly the phone, but we've gotten to that point in the last 10 years, 10 years ago or so. We still had so many DVDs and CDs and all of that. And people just were so overwhelmed with how to consolidate all of this. So that
Yeah,
was
that's
the
a
main
good point.
thing that I wanted
Yeah.
to, help people with. Is like, again, like I always say to them, look, we can always make your organization better. Like we can always make your collection look prettier with more keywords and this and that. But if you don't know where it lives and you don't have it in one place, we can't really back it up. And that's the vantage point I was coming from, having almost lost one of my own photos, as you mentioned, right? I had this one photo that was the only picture basically of my parents and my husband's parents in the same place. Still to this day, it's the only photo I have of them together. It's the only time they've ever met because they're from different countries. And so that was really important to me. I had a tech incident, almost lost it, miraculously got it back. So that's the vantage point I was coming from, is I do not want this to happen to anybody else. So how can I help people get things consolidated and backed up? And then we can talk about how are we going to find it faster? How are we going to organize it? But that's something that we can deal with later. So this whole DPO flow and figuring out how does the ecosystem look like, that was really the first step to accomplish that goal.
What does DPO flow stand for? The DPO part.
Yeah, it's DPO is digital photo organizing, and then flow is like short for workflow. So that was my process sort of that I came up with to teach. I still teach it about once a year online. And it's obviously the first part of my course as well, the first step.
What is that? What is that first step? Obviously, we're not going to go through your entire course here.
Yeah.
And if people want that after listening to you, they certainly can. But what is the very first step? Somebody comes to you or they want to take your course, don't know where to start. All they know is I've got stuff all over the place and I don't want to lose anything.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you help them start?
That is exactly the first step. It's let's figure out what the DPO flow looks like. And basically what that means is that I sit down with them and we draw it out. I have a digital, little tool that I use to draw out, but you could use Canva, you could use a piece of paper, whatever it is. But I need to know, where do your photos live? Where are they coming from? What are you doing with them? How are they being backed up? And we basically draw out the little blueprint, and like almost, if you can imagine an architectural sort of little blueprint for a house, right? We draw that out so we can see what's happening right now. Like what's actually happening in your world right now. Where are things coming from and how are they moving? And usually when you do that, not only does it help people see how much they have and why they feel overwhelmed, but it helps them kind of see the next step of, oh, so this is one of the bottlenecks. This is one of the problems. I actually don't have a backup. Because I asked them, like, well, where are your backups? Give me the names of the services or tools that you use. And they go, I don't know. Well, that's a problem. So now there's a question mark that we have to sort out. What are you doing with your photos? Are you making photo books? What are you, trying to do with them? Are you trying to print them and put them on your wall? Well, I'm not sure. Well, that's another question mark. So I feel like when you start to sit down and draw this stuff out and really analyze, like, where are things coming from? Where are they living right now? What clouds do you have? People can actually visually see what's happening in their universe, and that helps it sink in better. And it's also a really nice thing for them to see, like, oh, I have way more photos than I actually think I do, because I asked them about the inventory, like, okay, you have Apple Photos, how many photos are actually in there? And I make them check the number, and then that way they can see that, oh, maybe I don't have 10,000 photos, maybe I have 100,000 photos. So it really sets expectations nicely too of what needs to happen.
Yeah, I think for most people, like if you tell them, okay, let's start by just writing down all the places where your photos are, I think most people can do that. They might a little bit of help to think of the places that they have forgotten about, which could be certain cloud services. It could be things like Shutterfly or Walgreens, or it could be Drive somewhere. But I think that most people could actually do that. I think where it gets difficult is drawing the lines between them. Where should all these things go? So you can make a list, and you make a list, well, they're in my computer, they're on Apple iCloud, they're in Dropbox, whatever. But then the tricky part is, then what? You have your inventory. So, I mean, you kind of glossed over that a little bit because you said, well, we make this sort of chart, and it's actually like a flow chart probably. And I think getting the connections between the pieces and then figuring out, like, even that, just not even the then figuring out, but figuring out the connections between the pieces is probably a stumbling block right there, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's a huge stumbling block. And that's the piece that's usually missing, right? Is they may know where things are, or they might be able to make that list, like you said, but they don't know where things are going, or if they're just sort of stagnant sitting in a Dropbox somewhere, right? So we need to understand how things are moving, and why is that there's a bottleneck somewhere, like, what's the problem? And when you draw it out, you have to remember most people are very visual. So having this as a visual flow chart is actually really helpful, because then they can see on the chart, like, oh, this is where the problem is. And it also helps make things a little bit more tangible. And I think that's really important.
And so your process is a full circle, meaning from start to finish, where they're gathering, then they're putting it into some photo management software, right? And then it's helping them figure out backup strategy as well, right? So that it's full circle for them. And then you also give them the option to learn what to do as they move through life and continue to add to their collection, because that's always a problem. I know for me, every time I make a backup, it's a good thing. And then it's a bad thing, because now I have this other bundle of potential, files I have to deal with.
Right. Well, that's just the thing, right? It's not about just getting organized. It's about staying organized in the long run. And that's really the hard part, because if you don't understand your flow and how this ecosystem works together, you're going to be right back to square one in a few days. So that's why it's really important that we actually draw out and see, well, here's what's going on right now. What should it look like? And actually, when you do it, then people start to realize, like, oh, well, I actually have a lot of Apple devices. Maybe Apple Photos would be a really good fit for me. Or I ended up in Apple Photos, for example, just because I bought this phone, but actually everything else is like Windows, PC, like other things. Maybe that's not the right choice for me. So the answers actually start to reveal themselves pretty well once you start drawing this out. And then you start to realize, oh, this is where I need to make a switch. I mean, I can't tell you how many thousands of dollars people have saved because they've been like, oh, actually, I can cancel this service. I can cancel this service. I don't need to have all these things. I can consolidate. And that's my job as an organizer, is to help you make it simpler, How do I make this as simple as possible so that it's easy to maintain as possible? And a lot of the time people just have way too many accounts. I mean, all these digital
Yeah.
graveyards like floating
Well,
around everywhere.
it's
We don't
sort
need
of,
them.
that panic that I want to save and back up stuff. And because this
Yeah.
place is free to do that,
Yeah.
and this place is free to do that. So I'm going to
Yeah.
do it to all of them. I'm going to back up my photos to Google Photos and Amazon Photos. And oh, there's Dropbox. And oh, I get a 1 terabyte with OneDrive. Well, I'm going to throw them up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the
So,
thing, like that's
mhm,
fear-based decision making, right? And so
right.
what happens is then because you don't understand how your workflow actually looks or your ecosystem works, when you get that renewal notice of saying like, oh, actually, like I'm going to start deleting here because you have to upgrade because now you're maxing out on storage, you start to get scared. And then
Yep.
they start paying, and then they end up in all these subscriptions, right? Where
Yep.
they don't actually need it. So, I mean, that's fine if you want to take that approach, but my job is to help you understand what this ecosystem looks like so that you can make it as simple as possible. And then you know how it works. Just knowing if you're using something as a transportation mechanism, to sync somewhere, or if it's actually stored there permanently, which is your main collection and which is the backup. That alone is huge. And so I find that 90% of the people that come into my courses, they are super happy. By the time they understand the DPO flow, they're like, wow, like this is right here. This is what I needed. And then we go, okay, so now we can start organizing because now you know what's happening here. And you can talk about your goals and what you want to do with these photos and all that. But now at least we know they're safe and we don't have to worry about that anymore. That's the
Yeah.
main goal.
A very common scenario that I see when people come is what we described. So they come in and they have Apple Photos, and then they have an auto backup to Dropbox, and then they have Amazon, and then they have, something else. And they do get that notice, and all of a sudden Dropbox, they either have to pay for a higher plan or start paying. So they just start deleting stuff
Hmm.
from Dropbox, thinking that, oh, if I can just go through and delete a few things, then I won't need it. But the problem is by the time you're hitting that tier where it's time to
Hmm.
start paying, deleting 5, 10, 20, 100 photos isn't going to do it. You have to delete a whole lot more than that. And then you forget what you've deleted. And then you worry about, wait a minute, are they somewhere else? Wait. And then you start to panic because now you have very incomplete backups everywhere. And I see that all the time. And often, like you said, you can probably cancel some of those. You don't need to have these auto backups in 6 different places, incomplete ones at that. And because you forget what's there, and then, a year later you think, uh-oh, I think I need to download everything from Dropbox, and then you've got like 16 copies.
Yeah. A
So,
lot of the time it's not that people can't do a lot of these things. It's just that they don't understand some of the basics of how things are syncing or how things work.
Or the
It's like, oh,
ramifications of what they're doing.
right. Of like,
Yeah.
hey, if I delete there, does it delete here? Like that
Yeah.
alone is huge.
could you
Or
give
the
us, sorry, could you give us an example of a simple flow? Say it's somebody who's just an all Apple device. Because I think we're talking about this, and Susan and I know what you're talking about. We've seen some of your flow charts, but for listeners, they
Yeah.
might not really understand what you're talking about with the flow part and how things interact. So maybe you could give a couple examples, and we'll just use simple one. So somebody with all Apple devices,
Right.
what would
So
be a simple flow for them?
yeah, a simple, so if you imagine a flow chart in your head, where it goes from one place to another, we would draw that out and we would basically say, well, are all your photos coming from your phone? If so, the phone needs to be on the chart, right? And then like where do the photos go from there? Do they go to the cloud? If so, we draw a little cloud and we point the arrow towards the cloud. Does it go to your computer? Like maybe you wirelessly transfer them or plug in your phone and you transfer them to your computer without the cloud, then we point that little arrow there. And then on the computer, for example, like are they actually stored on the computer or do you have a hard drive hooked up that you're moving them to? How does that look and where are your backups going? And so we all draw that out. So a very simple flow is basically phone to iCloud to Apple Photos on your computer, maybe with a backup via Time Machine. Now, I will say this, it really depends on who you are. right? And I know we can talk about hubs and all of that and going, is it better to be in the cloud versus to be on your computer or hard drive or whatever? And in my head, that's based entirely on who you are and what your workflow needs to look like. So for me, if I'm on the go all the time and I need access to my files, we need to be cloud-based. There's just no other option unless I want to have this little, external drive with me and carry it everywhere. But we all know what's going to happen, that's going to get lost in a bag somewhere, or TSA is going to lose it, or whatever. Shout out to TSA, by the way. They're great. I can't
The international traveler going all over the place bashing TSA. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we've had our differences and agreements, but that's another show. Yeah, no, so it just depends on who you are. Like, because if you don't understand how the cloud works, you don't have to be in the cloud. Like, just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean you have to do it. It just depends on who you are, what's your goal, and how can we again make this as simple as possible for what your goals are so that you can actually maintain it. Because that's what I want. I want you to not end up in the same situation a few months down the line. I want this to be solved, and now going forward, if you do this right, you can switch out devices, you can switch out cloud services because you know the puzzle pieces that you're replacing. And that's the goal. It's all about clarity.
Yeah, I actually think, the cloud-based is probably the right solution for, 90% of people. For just what you're talking about, we're mobile. People are no longer spending their days in front of their computer or out doing other things and then doing like work or that kind of stuff in the evenings with their computer. They're out all the time and they want their photos with them all the time. There's really no other way to do that than the cloud. Because even if, you can buy a nice phone with a whole lot of storage, but you'll probably, one, it's very expensive to do that, but you'll probably run through it right away with the number of photos that we take right now.
Yeah, and don't forget the videos.
And the videos, yeah. And we're so used to having everything immediate.
Yeah.
People today don't, like younger people than us, well, I'll just speak for myself. Younger people than me don't know what it's like to, you have your camera and you take your roll of 24 or 36 and then you have to wait till you're home and then you have to bring it someplace to be developed and then you have to wait a week for it to come back. And then you see the pictures and you realize, oh, I didn't take the ones I really wanted, or these came out horribly. Today, none of that happens. You take a picture, you look at it right away, you take 30 more because that's what we tend to do. But we're so used to having everything with us. So you don't have to be cloud-based, but I think for most people, that is the usual solution.
Yeah. And that's exactly what the DPO flow is designed to uncover, right? Is to like answer those questions of, hey, do you want to be able to see it on the go? Do you want to be able to have it at your fingertips? Do you want to be able to back it up in a certain location or whatever? Like, that's all of that that we talk about. So yeah, I don't know that I could do anything at this point if I wasn't cloud-based, but yeah.
So are most of your clients, do they prefer the automated, ability to shuffle photos from their devices to another device through cloud services, or do they prefer to do it manually, take their phone and hook it up to their computer?
It's an interesting split at this point, because I agree with Allison that for 90% of people, the cloud is probably the correct choice, but there is still a lot of hesitation among a certain demographic. And the people who come into my courses are a very nice half and half split, actually.
Interesting. Yeah.
Some of them come into the courses because they're like, well, I just have so many photos. I'm all for automation and cloud and this and that. I just need to be able to manage it because there's just too much happening at the same time. And I need to understand where things are because I want to print photos of my kids or whatever it happens to be, and the other half is like, I did not grow up with technology. I don't understand what's happening. And I need to have a better understanding of the foundation of and the basics of what's going on for me to be able to manage it. And I actually want to do something with it now that I have the time. It's just that I don't know where to start. So it's
for many people,
split.
Yeah, it's a huge learning curve if they've not been into computers and now they want to do this. They want to wrangle their photos, as I say, and technology can be that stumbling block.
Yeah, and it's all about, did you grow up with technology? Did you grow up learning organizing skills? Um, or not? It's usually as simple as that. And based on that alone, we can probably make some predictions.
Well, and those are two different skills. You
Hmm.
said, technology and
Yes.
organizing skills. I mean, they can go hand in hand, but a lot of times they don't.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which is why I usually get people who have one or the other. Like we have very organized people, who are not techie at all, and then we have very techie people, but with no organizing skills. So the fact that you have to kind of combine those nowadays and develop both, that's a huge learning curve.
Yeah. What is a simple workflow that you have for somebody who does not want to use the cloud?
Yeah. So usually what we do is we talk about the devices of, where are your photos actually coming from? And even if it's from a phone, you can, as transfer them wirelessly. You can hook up a cord. There's, tools that you can use to transfer them without the cloud. The only thing is you have to then be more mindful of when you do it, because your phone runs out of space pretty quickly and all of that, right? So then it becomes a different maintenance plan that we have to look at. But yeah, we still have a few people who are just either not into paying for subscriptions, or they just aren't quite comfortable with the cloud because they don't know how to put their sort of, I don't know, grip on it. Like they don't
Yeah.
quite grasp how it works with all the syncing and all that. So they kind of want to stay away from it. But for most people, like once we explain how it works, they're like, oh, that was a lot cooler than I thought. That was a lot easier than I thought. And it's like,
Yeah.
sometimes it's just that hesitation, of not having
Yeah.
used it before or not understanding how it works. Once
It's
people understand it.
very it's very tricky not using the cloud because you have a phone, and unless you bought a lot of storage on that phone, which most people don't do, you do run out of space pretty quickly if you're storing all of the original photos on your phone. So if you're not using the cloud and transferring them off, then it means you need to delete them from your phone. And then you get worried about, wait a minute, where are they? And is that
Right.
safe? And you have to have a schedule that, once a month you're going to go in and transfer off. And so I think it's a lot harder. I think you have to be very, very organized to not use the cloud. The cloud makes it easy. And actually, I
Right.
think that's why we have such a big mess, honestly, is the cloud makes it so easy. And for the most part, storage is pretty cheap. I know people complain about, well, I don't want another subscription. I don't want to pay for Apple Photos, but we have the 2 terabyte plan for our family for all of us, and I think it's $9.99 a month. I think I have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure. But again, if you go back and think about what photos used to cost, they cost a
Mhm.
whole lot more than that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because people will complain, well, I don't want to pay for another subscription. I'm like, you've got 200 gigabytes. It's literally $2 a month. That's $24 a year, which if you had to go and develop a roll of film, that's probably that's probably one roll of film once you purchase the film and develop it. So there's a very different mindset now.
Well, I think people have forgotten that perspective. I actually was in town on Saturday developing a roll of film, ironically.
How'd that
And that was
happen?
about $30, regular film. So yeah, there you go. I mean, it's just, I think we've forgotten that perspective a little bit. And also sometimes, once people start to understand how it actually works and how it's meant to work, they go, oh, well, actually, that is a lot easier. It's just that they were kind of scared to get into it. And I think once
Yeah.
you get over sometimes those stumbling blocks, then you go, oh, actually, this was a lot better. I didn't realize.
So there's uh, a group of people that do not have a physical computer. They have a tablet of some sort, and maybe they have their phone, their cell phone. Um, and so when you're talking about getting all your originals, it makes it so much harder, you know. So what would you suggest to people like that, would you suggest that they actually go out and get a desktop or, a laptop of some sort to do this? Or is there a way to do it with phones and tablets?
I mean, there are ways to do it with phones and tablets, absolutely. And again, it comes down to looking at the DPO flow and figuring out, well, where should this be living? Um, I am for having at least one copy of all of your sort of high-res originals somewhere locally, just at least as a backup. I mean, you know, I've seen too many archives go wrong to not kind of recommend that, but the way in which we do that might vary, you know. So if you export your archive somewhere, or however you want to do that, like we can figure
Have
out
a
how to
friend
do
help
that.
you,
Have a friend
or
help you.
hire an
Exactly. Yeah.
organizer to do it. Yeah.
Right.
So that you've got, a copy in one moment in time of your entire library, and then figure out a way to keep that up to date moving forward.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I'm basically cloud-based at this point, but I have a local copy here and I have a local copy in Sweden, and that gets updated manually every now and then. And that's just,
Yeah.
So
again,
there's your 3-2-1.
yeah, a backup of the
I
backup.
think once
Yeah.
you're used to doing it, it's not hard, but you need to figure out your flow, so to
Mhm.
speak, and figure out how to do that, because it really, without a computer, that is a lot harder, I will say. But if that is you and you don't have a computer, hire somebody for an hour or two. There is software that we can use that can literally just export everything. You stick it on a drive in a folder with the date of the export and call it photo backup. And then, at whatever frequency, you do it again, and you create a new folder with the new date and you delete the old one. And so it's not impossible. And if you're actually doing it all at once, it's actually easier. Where I find people get into trouble is they don't know what they exported last time. So then they just want to do a portion, but they're not sure where to start. So I actually, for people in that situation, I actually suggest them just export the entire thing every, few months or whatever you want to do, delete the old ones, keep it nice and simple. But yeah, if you don't have a computer, you would need to hire somebody or get a friend to do it for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we have tried to make that a lot easier, in the past. Like along with a friend, um started discussing a program to be able to basically export your entire archive from Apple Photos.
Mhm.
And that is now a program that's on the
Yeah.
market. And, it has really helped the fact that you can export directly from the cloud with that one. You know what I mean? And like there's ways now, we have tools that we didn't used to have that really helps with that stuff. But I mean, even if you have a cheap laptop or borrow a friend's laptop or something, I feel like you should at least do an export every now and then and just kind of have it. Like there's no harm in not, in taking that precaution.
Yeah. What do you do with two scenarios? What do you do with families who want to combine all of their stuff? Because now we're talking about an even more complicated scenario. And then the second one is, what do you do with people who have mixed devices? For the very longest time, I had an iPhone and I had a work PC, and never did they mix. And I didn't even know at that point, this is before my photo organizing days. I was like, I literally have no idea. Everything's just going to live on my phone.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a huge, I mean, problem for a lot of people still, right? That's a big part of the reason why we get clients still who are confused about what program they should be using, because it's not easy. If you don't know this world, there's a lot to learn and it's not easy to understand. But just to sort of answer the question on the family first, it's really no different than doing it for one person. It just ends up being a bigger charge. That's all it is, because we're just listing out more devices. And the same thing for businesses and companies and all of that. I mean, I recently worked with a company. We had almost 30 team members in 6 different divisions, and we needed to make one flow, right? And it can be done. It's just a lot more devices and a lot more moving pieces, and it gets more and more complicated, right, to streamline. But that's systems architecture. That's what that is. And when you get really good at that, you start to see where the connections go and where it should be going to make it the simplest as possible. So especially with families, I want to say you obviously go to the lowest common denominator, meaning if 2 people are Apple devices and 3 people are Android, then you go Android usually, or like, unless there's a good reason to not do it. So it's just, again, looking at whatever makes sense for this family. If somebody's less tech savvy than somebody else and they know how to share photos efficiently, maybe you let them do that instead of having to train the other person to do that, right? So it's a matter of looking not only at the actual flow then, but actually what are the tech skills that are involved and who's going to be maintaining it. If you or I or Susan are maintaining something for somebody, we can have a higher tech level to the workflow and more complicated pieces than if somebody else is gonna, do it who hasn't got that experience, so it becomes a few more variables that you have to look at, but it can be done. It's just, you're just laying a bigger puzzle.
I do think building that chart is probably very helpful. A big
It
flow
is.
chart. Where's it coming in? Where's it
Oh yeah.
going? And I also think you want to have one person in charge because when
Yes.
you have more than one, they start doing things that don't match. And then you
Well,
get
and
into
that's another
trouble.
problem. Yeah, especially with families and especially with business owners, because they're like, oh, let me outsource this, or let me have, my husband or wife or spouse or whatever it is do this, or let me have my kid do this. And then they do a little and they do, and there's just too many cooks in the kitchen. And then we don't know what's happening again. So it again becomes a very clear, I do a lot of training, as you can tell, of like, how does this look? Who's in charge of this? What tech level do we have, and how can we make this as simple as possible? There's a lot of moving pieces to this, which is why it's complicated.
It is.
Well, and every software program out there has a little unique twist to it that you have
Mm-hmm.
to understand. There's a difference between shared libraries and shared albums in Apple. There's, like if you were in Google Photos, and you spend a lot of time IDing people and adding keywords, that may not go with the files when you export. So, if you're going to spend time organizing, you should probably figure out where you're going to land on what software and what the features and functionality of that software is going to do for you, so that you don't spend a lot of time and effort working on your catalog only for it to just, you realize it now is stuck in that environment if you want to continue to use the information you put in there, right? And
Yeah.
that's like terrible to find out after the fact. So you really want to get a handle on that before you go down that path.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's so important to consolidate and back up and have your DPO flow all planned out so you know what you're actually doing. Like, what architect would build a house without a blueprint, right? You just don't do it. And that's the thing, is that once you understand and have the plan, then everything else becomes so much easier because you know exactly what needs to happen and when and who's going to take care of it. And that's the heavy lifting. The organizing goes very smoothly once you've done all that work up front, and then the expectations are clear. People know what's expected of them, and they understand that, oh, this may have been a little bit more complicated than I initially gave it credit for.
So let me ask you this: what what does your workflow look like? I mean, what is your go-to tool, since you travel all around the world and you've got, you know, data flying, in the cloud all over the place? Where does it land? What software do you use?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's varied over the years. But
Has it changed?
it hasn't changed much. It's varied a little
Oh,
bit because I've tested a lot of things, but obviously since I was a photographer back in the day, we had tethered shooting into Lightroom. So I'm still a Lightroom girl. And it goes from my phone into Lightroom Cloud and then automatically
oh,
downloads into my Lightroom Classic. And then
okay.
it's backed up on my computer from there.
And how do you like Lightroom in the cloud?
It's working at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that it's, I've no problems with it or anything. I don't know that it's necessarily the best one, but it's the one that works for
But you
me
don't
since
spend a
I'm on
lot
the
of
go.
time in there, it sounds like. You use it for the transport
It's a
capability.
transportation device to get it
Okay,
into Lightroom Classic, correct? Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah.
So you don't do your editing. You do that locally on a hard drive, on a computer.
It depends. It depends.
Oh,
I do a little bit of editing on my phone for social or whatever if I'm on the go. I have some apps for that, but then I usually end up posting it, and that's still a photo that gets deleted. If save all of my originals and raw files and all of that in Lightroom, and then I edit from there if I need something fancier. Sometimes for something that's going to go on a website or somewhere else, like you need a bigger, better photo that's better edited than something that's going to go on a social account. So sometimes there's a variations there, but yeah, everything goes into Lightroom Classic. It has been for 20 years plus. So that's where I'm still at.
So that's interesting. That's an interesting flow that you're so cloud-based, because there's some pretty big differences between Lightroom Classic and Lightroom. I don't know what they call it, Lightroom Cloud, or maybe they just call it Lightroom. I always get
They just
confused what
call
they
DC,
call it,
yeah.
but
it's just Lightroom
um,
and then Lightroom CC
yeah, but because when I
or
was
Classic.
helping somebody with some stuff, I use Lightroom Classic a fair bit on my computer, but the captions and keywords and things don't carry over to the cloud-based. So there's some interesting issues there. The photos will, and I think the edits like crop and color and that kind of stuff will, but the metadata doesn't transfer quite as well. So that actually surprises me a little bit that
Well, I
that's
don't
how
do
you
any
do it.
metadata until I get into Lightroom Classic. So I like to organize on my big iMac because I have a bigger screen and lots more fun, actually spending some time in that program.
Mhm.
So the app is in the cloud is a transportation device to just have it download directly into the program, so I don't have to do a bunch of manual stuff. So that's that. So then once I am home, if I, when I'm home, I tend to do the organization there. Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's unusual. Well, maybe actually for photographers, that's not unusual. That I know.
Yeah, it might be coming from that aspect.
Yeah, interesting. So
So do
what
you keep,
are,
I have
go
one
ahead.
quick, sorry,
No, go
just
ahead.
curious how everybody uses software. So do you keep just your stuff in your Lightroom catalog, or do you pull in your husband's and family's stuff?
Mm.
So,
I have the Lightroom apps on all the devices, so all devices download automatically into Classic.
okay.
Hmm.
All right.
Yeah,
So that is a way to deal with a family if
for
you wanted to
example.
stay in Lightroom. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. My husband doesn't take any photos, so we don't worry about. Actually, my kids don't either. So I don't ever really. Every once in a while, they'll take a couple and they'll just send me that, but it's not
I'm the
something that we
main
do a lot.
photographer, and I think a lot of
Yeah,
us in the industry are the main
yeah.
photographers. I mean, my daughter's getting pretty good at it, actually. She's starting to take a lot, but she's now enjoying actual film as well, which is fun to see. She's reverting back to that. So
Is that
my
why you
mom,
were developing film this weekend?
that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so she has my mom's old camera, actually, and she's exploring what film is compared to the phone, and she's enjoying both.
That's different. So what is a typical, I'm going to kind of take us back to the beginning a little bit. So somebody comes to you or they come to take your class. What are the typical places where their photos are, where they start, their inputs?
Mm. Mm. Obviously the phone, but we still have a lot of people with old media and old computers where they're like, I can't throw this away because I'm not sure what's here. And I know I have this drive with a bunch of, backups and this and that, and I'm not sure what's going on here. Um, so actually, like a lot of old hard drives and a lot of old phones with just people trying to get stuff off of them and making sure and feeling confident, I should say, that everything is actually off of them. Like that's a big stumbling block. Like they may have transferred something once, but they're not exactly sure that, hey, did I do that right? Or do I need to do it again? Or like there's so much insecurity around that and just from that fear of losing it, obviously. But yeah, the phone is obviously the big thing. And now we also see the multiple cloud backups, all those digital graveyards that I was talking about.
Yeah. What are some examples of the digital graveyards? Because there's some that people don't really realize they
Mhm.
forget
Yeah,
that they
iCloud is
have.
actually one for anybody who's had an iPhone and moved away, or maybe didn't realize that it was like turned on and then they turned it off because they didn't want to pay for the subscriptions. Google Photos is a huge one. Prime, um, OneDrive.
So Prime would be
Dropbox.
Amazon photos.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a ton of those. Um, a lot
Shutterfly.
of Shutterfly, a lot of OneDrive, I want to say too, because people have OneDrive sometimes at work and then they don't realize
Yep.
that they're syncing personal and work stuff. And like there's a lot of that. And even just like, yeah, like files, on their actual phone. Like sometimes people save stuff as files instead of as photos, and maybe they don't see it on the camera roll. Like there's a bunch of things that tend to happen
How about
Or in their email.
I was just going
Email.
to say, how about email or
Yep.
texts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another one that I've come across a couple times is when people have thought they've lost stuff for whatever reason, they think it's gone, and we start looking and think about, well, have you ever had anything printed by Walgreens or CVS? And then we go into those accounts, and normally what's in those accounts are things that you have elsewhere already. But I had one woman who thought she had kind of lost years upon years, and we found them all in Walgreens because she had, I don't know if they still do this, but at one point anyway, you could set an automatic backup to Walgreens because they want to get all your photos so you'll print. And we found 6, 7 years worth
Oh
of
my
photos
gosh.
in there. Of course, the recovery of the photos were terrible when we pulled them down, but terrible is better than nothing.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's a lot of that. CVS comes to mind, Costco, like all of those places where you may have developed something and you uploaded it.
Yeah.
Shutterfly, like you said, Susan, like you made a photo book or whatever, and then now they're sitting there. And people don't always know if that's the original or if that's the copy, if that's the only copy they have and all that. So it just, consolidation to me is the biggest part of this puzzle. If you can get your consolidation and then your backups, like you're off to a great start. It's huge.
So we've talked a lot about this mostly goes to consolidation and then access. Where are
Mhm.
you going to actually get your photos? But what about sharing? Do you work that into your flow somehow? I mean, there's some people who really don't share that much, a text here or there, or an email, and then there's other people who want to put together big groups of photos, albums worth of photos to share. So how does that work into your flow?
Yeah, so it depends on if this is a one-time thing or is this going to be a recurring thing. So if somebody is a, five-member family, and then, let's say we have two people who are going to be sharing photos regularly, then we make a plan for how they are going to share those photos so that you don't get a few on WhatsApp, a few in text, a few in emails. Like there has to be a plan for how are they recurringly sharing that. And then on your end, like what are you doing to actually make sure those are imported into your collection and not just, accessible, right? For a brief
That's
period of
actually a
time.
huge point because
It's
people think
huge.
they automatically have it and they don't.
No,
Just because you can see it in your messages or in WhatsApp, it does not mean that's part of your collection. You got to click that
no,
little button.
no, not at
Yeah. You
all. And
actually,
that's the
yeah.
thing. Yeah. People go like, oh, I thought I had access to that. Like, yeah, well, for a specific period of time you did. You don't
Mhm.
anymore. You actually have to import that. So we make a plan based on the flow of like who's sharing what, how are they sharing it, and how are you actually getting it into that. And then if there's sharing beyond that, then they know that, oh, I don't have to save that because that's coming in a different way to me. But there has to be a plan for how are we going to do that. If it's once in a while, like let's say if you and I were sharing and we don't normally share, then it would be maybe whatever method is easier for you, but I would make sure that I actually grab them and have copies and all of that. Like it's a one-time thing that you can kind of figure out. But the biggest thing is recurring,
Mhm.
especially between family members. That's where it gets tricky because then people don't know where things live. Again, that's the main point of this flow is like we have to know where the main collection is because sharing is not the same as storing in permanently in your archive. So yeah,
And a lot of people don't realize with the sharing part, if you share an album with somebody on almost any platform, either it be iCloud or Google, the biggest that come to mind, if you don't actually save those to your collection, if the other person is cleaning out their stuff and they realize, oh, I don't need these albums anymore, they're 2 years old, and they delete them, then you lose access.
Mhm.
So if you're listening to this and people have shared photos with you that you want to keep, make sure you share that you save them to your own archive because you don't own them. I'm a
Yeah,
big fan of making sure you own your own stuff and you have possession of it. And it's very easy to lose that if
it
you're not
is.
Well,
careful.
in addition, people don't realize quality is often a variable when you share through different types of resources. So often in email, you can't send an original because the file's too big these days. Same with text, it will reduce the quality. And so maybe doing AirDrop when you see your family is a better option, or uploading the full size to a Dropbox folder and sharing it that way. Um,
That's actually a big one,
It
especially
is.
like for me. I meet so many friends, family members, colleagues, clients when I travel, and a lot of them have like WhatsApp, and they're like, "Hey, here's that photo we took," and I'm like, "No,
Yes.
no, 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 no. I will send you a request to upload your file.
Yep.
Let's not do this here because I know you mean well and I appreciate you sharing it, but let me airdrop it. Let me send you a request. Let's do something else where we can actually maintain the quality so all of us have these really good photos, and so that's usually where I will either, do a WeTransfer in batch or something like that, or send a Dropbox request for people to upload.
Yep.
I'm usually the one to step in and take charge of that because
Me
I'm
too.
so used to all of this stuff, right? And it just otherwise it
And you have
starts
certain
coming in from
standards.
different. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
but it also starts coming in from so many different places that you just can't keep track of what you have and what you don't have.
Right.
More so than the quality, that's like a really big problem. Like I don't remember then what I got from where. And it's just I want to do it in a streamlined way. So yeah, so all my friends know, like we just have to wait for Caroline to say what she's gonna do with this.
And even if you upload it to some of the socials, you're not going to get even the metadata with it. So, because it's going to get stripped along the way somewhere and you won't know, where it came from and if the date's right. So it's just a mess. Yeah, it can be a mess.
So is that worked into your, so we started to talk about that. How is that worked into the flow? Do you actually make a plan for that where you talk about the situation where you have repeated or continual sharing, and then what you do with the one-offs? And I would guess that this would come a little bit later in the development of the system, except that you kind of need to know that you're going to be doing that at the beginning to
No,
set up the right system.
you're right. It comes right up front. All of it needs to be in place. Because we need to first know where are the photos going, like where's the permanent archive and where are they coming from and how are we going to get them there? How do we get them from A to B in the smoothest way possible, right? And so I know that if, let's say my hub is Dropbox, I will be sending Dropbox requests to people because that's the easiest way then for that to get to where it needs to go. If it's a different system, okay, can they share from that same system into my system? Let's say, for example, if I was in Apple Photos, let's say Susan also has Apple Photos, that would be the easiest way for her to share with me. So let's keep it in the same system. So one-offs we will deal with, but what we can do is we can make a plan for the one-offs, like what is the best method to choose or like opt for when you have that choice in front of you. The recurring stuff, we set it up and that's fine. But even more so, one-offs also in my mind includes scanned photos, that you're working on with your backlog, CDs, all of that stuff. Once that's imported, you don't need that anymore. Like you don't need to do that again. So we actually usually end up with a bigger list of one-offs in the beginning than we do with recurring. Usually recurring is phone and maybe camera and something else. By the way, I love that camera is now like really camera? Yeah,
I
it's
know.
usually the phone. But anyway, but the point is that we usually get a bigger list of one-offs in the beginning until all of this stuff is consolidated. Then it starts to go more into maintenance and recurring stuff.
I think it gets very complicated because there are so many different ways to share. And you're right,
Yes.
people lose track. So if you set up a system that says, you know what, I'm always going to be the one to do it, and I'm always going to use a Dropbox request, or SmugMug is another good one actually for that. Or I mean, there's a ton of them. iCloud links. There's about a gazillion different ways you can do it to get the high quality. But what I'm hearing is you need to have that system set up so that you know in advance. You don't have to think about it. You just say, you know what? We just had this really fun time. I am going to send you a Dropbox request, or I am going to do this. And then you don't have to worry about it. It always comes in the exact same way. So you can process it the same way, and you won't forget and you won't end up with duplicates because we all know what happens after a group outing. People are texting the photos back and forth, and the next thing you know, you've got 6 copies, but you're not entirely sure if they're exactly the same, especially group shots. So you go through and try and figure it out, and it's a pain.
Exactly. So we need less cooks in the kitchen and we need a system for handling it. And the more you do that and the more you have that decision made, you make it once so that you then know going forward, okay, I'm just going to do this. And then people learn, people around you, like they
Yeah.
know right now how I'm going to ask for the photos. They know I'm going to send a request. And so they just wait for that, which is great.
And I think it's important for people to know is there's no one size fits all box here. But there are sort of common scenarios. So if you do something like your course or really sit down and think about it, there's maybe 3 or 4 different flows that probably work for a lot of people. And once you do this, you can often siphon other things. I got rid of Dropbox because I have pCloud and realized they do exactly the same thing. And there's a lot of that. So you can streamline, and it feels good because you're maybe saving a little bit of money, but you're also in your head just streamlining. There's fewer things to think about
Yeah.
once you already have that plan.
The idea is that you make the decision once and then you don't have to make it again. And that goes for any
Yeah.
organizing, right? That's the organizing
That
project
goes for
as a whole.
life,
That
I
goes for
think.
life. Exactly. You make your decision up front. This is what's going to happen. And then all you have to do is maintain that decision and maintain that system, right? The problem happens when you're constantly skipping between decisions and going back and forth and trying different systems. And that's common in the beginning because you maybe haven't found the right, choice. But you got to figure out what's happening at some point, or you're going to try and maintain too many different systems at once and it's just going to fall apart. So you're better off making that decision and then kind of sticking to it.
Yeah. I do think that's a good motto for life. Let's just take this beyond, photo organizing and all
That's
that.
how we do it.
And this is our, yeah. I have found with some things, it can be hard to make that decision and it can be almost paralyzing to try and figure it out. But for most people, once you decide, you make that decision of what you're doing, it's so much easier. I see this with my kids all the time with a variety of things. And once they just decide, okay, this is what I'm going to do, it's just easier. And then you just follow the rules that you've created for yourself and move forward.
That's it. That goes for anything. I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
I love it. Okay, we're getting towards the end, so we have to ask our usual question. A little bit poor segue here, but I don't really care. So I know you must have a lot of photos from probably lots of different places and lots of different parts of your life, I guess. So I'm going to ask you to pick just one that is either the strangest or one you'd like to talk about.
Well, we
And
already touched
where
on...
do you store it and how did it get there? Because we'll have to add that in. What was its path to get into your library?
I have, obviously, Susan mentioned the one up front that I talk about in my course and all of that. That's my most cherished photo of my family, obviously. But the one that I think took the greatest path to get to me. And I did ask, by the way, my client if I could keep this, and he said, yes, it's fine. It's a photo that came from my client. And it's a photo where he's on vacation and I'm in the background.
Oh,
which
how
I think
that
is
happened?
really fun. Yeah.
Okay, so how did you figure that out? Yeah, how did that happen? And then how did you guys make the connection that that's you in their photo?
So my lovely client, this is a client I had many, many years ago, 2014, 15, whatever-ish. And he's from this area of Chicagoland, and I was collaborating with an estate planner. So she was doing the house, and I was doing the photos. Giant photo collection. I mean, we're talking 50 bankers boxes plus that I basically took from the print organizing to the scanning through the digital archive, through the genealogy, the whole thing. And I worked on that project for a long time. And one of his batches was from around the year 2000 or so. And that was when I was in college in Honolulu. And he happened to be on vacation in Honolulu at that time. So you see him and his family basically on vacation. And then I am walking with my backpack going to school in the background. And I knew it was me because of my hair and the backpack and the color and everything. It was very clear that it was me. It wasn't just like, but I was heading
That is incredible
to the bus stop to go to school. And so the way that photo found its way to me was actually quite interesting. And I kind of, I was startled when I first saw it, and I was like, whoa, oh my gosh, is that actually me? Absolutely, it was me for sure. So the fact that I got to do his collection years later, was fun.
That's so wild. 1, the fact that you were there when he was there. 2, somebody took the picture. 3, that it's been in one of 50 bankers boxes for however long. 4, that you were the one to handle those. 5, that while you were handling those, you actually saw the photo, because people may not realize, but when we get huge collections that we are scanning or working on, we don't really look at
No.
the photos. They kind of fly through. I think, the better analogy is in one ear and out the other. And if there's an, equivalent for your eyes, this is it. So that is amazing.
Amazing, right? Yeah. So I think in this particular collection, I felt more of a connection to him because he had actually lived in Sweden. He had actually lived, in the Chicagoland area, and he vacationed in a lot of the same spots. Like, we had a lot of very similar interests and locations that were common. So I think I just, when I saw those pictures from Hawaii, I went, oh, and I kind of reminisced a little bit myself, right? Because I'm like, oh, that's my hometown, basically, over here.
And that's me.
And then, oh, there I am. Look at that. Yeah.
Did you then start looking through the rest to see if you were in any of the others?
I didn't spot myself in any of the others, but yeah, that one was crazy.
That is wild. That's got to be our best,
It was one of those things where you start to question, like, like, I
6
guess
degrees of separation or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Meant for me.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That has to go up in our top 3-ish. I'm thinking back to all the ones we've asked. We've had some good ones, but that's pretty wild. Not that it's a competition, but
Yeah. That collection was clearly meant for me.
Clearly. How long ago was that, you said, roughly?
Just about 10 years ago now.
Okay. I love it. I love it. Well, Caroline, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, we will have links to you and links probably to your course that we've talked about and some other things, whatever you want to share with us, we'll add to the show notes so that if people listening are looking for you and more information, they'll be able to find you. And this has been such a great chat, and what a great ending. What a great story.
Yeah,
that sort of wrapped it all up. Yeah. And being organized, you can find yourself in other people's photos.
Imagine that.
No kidding. That takes it to a whole other level.
Yeah. No, thank you for having me. It's a lot of fun to chat with you and share the love for photos.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, that was another wonderful conversation. I just enjoy working with Caroline, not only as a colleague, but then as a client. She's been instrumental in so many ways in helping me understand digital organizing so I can help my clients. And it's, she's just a wealth of knowledge.
She has a really unique way of looking at things. I've seen some of the flows, the workflows that she's created, the charts. And it really is, if you're struggling where to start and you want to do it by yourself, or maybe you want to reach out to her, but either way, if you just write down all the places where you think your stuff is, where they're coming from, and then, start drawing arrows. Okay, well, it comes in here. Where's it going now? And you just grab a piece of paper. You don't need anything fancy. And it's really eye-opening. And I don't know anybody else. Like, I think her approach is really unique. And it's super helpful.
Yes. And I have embraced her ideas and concepts, so that's sort of where I start with my clients now, especially the digital organizing, and when I help people with Mylio or whatever, because it's really, really important that you get your stuff wrangled before you jump into a program like Mylio or any of those others, because you want to control your flow. Yeah.
I don't even think you can choose a program until you know where your stuff is coming from and what you want to do with it. So I always, people sometimes come in and say, well, I want everything here. And I'm like, well, let's back up just a little bit. Where is it coming from?
Down a path. Like they've already got it like on Drobo, or they're, it's on a NAS, and you need to.
I hope they're not on a Drobo. I hope we don't have any of those listeners, because they're in big trouble.
Well, just to let people know that Drobo company is no longer in business, so they're not providing you updates for that software, for that NAS device that you own. So as long as things keep moving along, you're fine. However, you do want to consider moving that copy off to even just a plain USB external hard drive, or moving it into another NAS RAID system. But yeah, Drobo is no longer around, which is the case with a lot of technology, so.
And that takes us right back to the beginning. It's you want to figure out where all your stuff is, figure out where it's going, figure out, okay, what do you want to do with it? Are you a big sharer or not? Do you have family that you're trying to combine with? Like all of those things. And you make yourself a nice chart, or take Caroline's course, or contact a photo organizer. But it's all very, very helpful. I do think it's worth. A lot of people panic, and that's why they have 15 backups of various sizes. So it's worth taking a little bit of time and just sketching out, where are your things? And this is what Caroline talked about. Where are they? Where are they going? And what do you want to do with them at the end? And then you'll be in a much better position.
Long-term storage. Yeah. Long-term legacy storage that is hopefully being backed up on a regular basis. And, should you need to evacuate quickly, what to grab, or you don't have to grab anything because it's backed up in the cloud somewhere safe.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
That's what we're
so,
here for.
Once again, we ended another episode talking about backup, which we do. I would actually be funny sometime to go back and see how many episodes we talk about having a solid backup plan is. I'm guessing it's 90% of them or more. So there is our little PSA for this month and backup. And I'm super excited. I think you guys are all going to love listening to this. I hope that you've enjoyed it.
As much as we have.
As much as we have. And all the resources, as usual, are on our resource page at insidephotoorganizing.com. So head on over there if you're looking for a link to Caroline or anything we ever talk about.
Thank you again, Allison, for another lovely interview, and we'll catch everyone next time.
Absolutely. See you next time.
That's it for our show today. Remember, you can find this episode on all of your favorite podcast apps. Be sure to click follow so you can stay up to date with the latest in photo organizing. We'll catch you next month.